In the last 5 parts of this series, I've explored the impact of the Horn of Africa drought and China's long and short-term response. In this final part, I tell the surprising story of my journey across Ethiopia that revealed a very different side of a country often portrayed as desperate, dry and hungry. Johnny Zirotti is quiet, considered and charming. Extremely charming. The perfect companion for my long drive through Ethiopia's mountain passes as I made my way to Harar to report on the drought. Harar, a 10th century walled city in the northeast of the country, not far from the Somali border, had been identified to me by the World Food Programme, who claimed the surrounding areas were at the time Ethiopia's worst affected by the drought. Johnny was excited about the trip. Ethiopia's a beautiful country, he told me, not like people imagine it. It takes about 10 hours to drive from Addis Ababa to Harar. The road twists up and down steep valley gorges as it traces the Great Rift Valley north and then bears off east, descending to a desert floor before making a final ascent to the hilltop city. Children run out with flowers at every vantage point from which spectacular views await. We arrived 2 hours after dark and found to our horror that a big conference had just started, rendering all the hotel rooms occupied. Johnny reassured me as we went knocking from one guest house to the next, until finally we found a room. Keen to explore, I set my alarm for 5:30 the next morning to catch the early light. "I'm coming too," Johnny insisted, and as first light broke, we were walking into the old walled city, along with the early morning churchgoers. By 6, the streets were filled with white cloth worshippers, and we followed them to the church. The security guard gave me just 1 minute to take a few pictures, and then Johnny and I took off into the small winding streets of the old city. I don't know how long we wandered the small colourful alleyways, taking pictures and stopping to speak to passers-by. One kind old man went out of his way to show us some old mosques, more than 1,000 years old, he told us. I gave him a small tip. Emerging into the bustling market, I felt that I'd been transformed back to the 10th century. That was until Johnny suggested breakfast at the Harar City Mall. Granted, it was not a Beijing, glitzy shopper's world, but the scrambled egg, fresh bread and coffee could not be beat anywhere. Especially the coffee, this being by many accounts the birthplace of coffee. We took a break during the midday sun to recuperate from our journey, but by early afternoon I was keen to get back to the old city. Johnny was sleeping and had asked me to wake him before I ventured out. A little drowsy, but smiling as always, he joined me as we tried to remember which streets we'd already walked, so we did not repeat ourselves. 1 hour into the maze, we stumbled across the beginnings of a wedding ceremony. A small crowd gathered outside the bride's house, awaiting the groom to come and fetch her, along with the wedding gifts. As we stood waiting with them, I met a young computer student, a friend of the groom, who switched between messaging updates on his iPhone and describing to me the whole process. The groom finally showed up, entered the home, and then a series of gifts were ported to awaiting cars before finally the wedding couple emerged to much singing and shouting. As the night drew in, Johnny suggested we walk down to the far city gate where hyenas were rumoured to appear at dusk. We were told we were too early but used the time to rest from what had been a long day's walk. A young man in a red t-shirt appeared after about half an hour with a white container of meat. Sitting in a small area of dirt under a big tree, he began to feed the aggressive-looking animals and motioned to Johnny and me to come and join him. Johnny went first, then Andu Alam, our driver, who had come to pick us up, and then finally me. I had no idea of the risks involved, but the experience of being so close to these wild animals was exhilarating, leaving all 3 of us buzzing with excitement as we moved off for dinner. After 3 days driving around the area reporting the stories, we headed back along the same road we'd come in. We stopped briefly at the chat market just outside the city. The plant, chewed as a mild drug throughout the region, is grown here, and the main market is madly busy and loud with people bartering prices. Johnny told me the loud arguments were not aggressive at all, but as we left I saw one such negotiation break out into a fight with a burly woman trader attacking a would-be buyer with a rock. "All part of the way they trade here," Johnny insisted. On the journey home, I suggested we stop off at a park and stay the night. We'd seen some fascinating African wildlife along the way, but it had been impossible to stop the car and get pictures. Johnny agreed, and at last light we pulled into Awash National Park for a quick tour. An armed guard escorted us on a dusty track through the semi-desert bush and down to a waterfall. A small crocodile bathed on the far bank, baboons played in the bushes, and 2 oinks battled in the bush above the falls. I could have easily spent an hour sitting and taking it all in, but our guard wanted to show us a view of the Rift Valley. With the light fading, we set off, arriving at a hilltop vantage point just in time to see the sun set across the awe-inspiring valley. On the final morning, Johnny and I went bird watching down by a lake just outside the park. The morning started peacefully as we tiptoed around the lake, trying to get as close to the birds as we could. But we were distracted by a small group of martial artists going through their paces by the lake. After we approached them, it became apparent that they were there for a photo shoot, but their small compact camera and the photographer were struggling to realise their goal. Without a thought, Johnny volunteered me as the assigned photographer, and I spent the next half hour setting up wild karate kicks against the bright blue sky. It was a fitting end to an assignment that was full of unexpected events. My lasting impression is that Ethiopia is under pressure from the drought and has needed the international support it has received, but it should not be imagined as barren. It is a truly spectacular place. With direct flights from 4 Chinese cities, it's also very accessible for an adventure holiday. But let me leave the last words to Johnny, who left me saying, "Please tell people what you've experienced and don't just write about our troubles." I'm hoping the story does just that.